All right. I want to read you what I just thought was the best piece, the best response to all this stuff. I'll give you the latest on the shooting. The killer, Stephen Paddock's girlfriend, Marilou Danley, arrived here in L.A. last night. She was in the Philippines. The police say she's a person of interest. They're interviewing her as we speak, trying to find out the motive for this guy. They cannot find out the motive for this guy. But she went to the Philippines. Before she went to the Philippines, he wired $100,000 to the Philippines. So we don't know what that's about. I mean, it's funny. I turned on the TV to see what the updates were. It's just people speculating. Really, it's kind of awful. I guess they have to fill the airtime, but we just don't know. We don't know. The sheriff, somebody made some remark about maybe he was radicalized, and on InfoWars or something, they're playing that out to say he was killing conservatives. But there's also a story that he was planning attacks on other not just country music concerts, but other kinds of concerts. Multiple witnesses do say he was unkind to his girlfriend, that he treated her brusquely and badly, and people witnessed this. His brother, Eric Paddock, who's I shouldn't laugh, but he's just slowly falling apart. He keeps giving these interviews, and each interview gets more and more emotional. They've got a third brother who apparently, like their father, was also had a criminal history. So maybe Eric Paddock is like the one guy, maybe he's the white sheep of the family or something, and he's just trying to deal with this. Here's a cut of him talking. Cut number 6 of him talking about the fact that this guy was a gambler, but he was a successful gambler. And the records show he was paid up at these casinos. He was not in debt, as an earlier report said.
Steve was a highly intelligent, highly successful person. He could have done anything he wanted to do. And he did. He made himself wealthy. He made us wealthy. He was a very successful person. He gambled for 20 plus years successfully. It's like a job to him. He did it mathematically. He did it because it was a way to have a fun life and he didn't go poor doing it.
So he goes on and talks about his terrible feelings that maybe he could have done something differently. Maybe if the guy had called him, he could have talked him out of it. But all that is just the emotional side of this, and there's been a lot of emotions. Jimmy Kimmel. I don't want to constantly talk about Jimmy Kimmel, but he really has become, CNN said, how did Jimmy Kimmel become our conscience? It's like CNN, Jimmy Kimmel is your conscience, I mean, if your conscience is Jimmy Kimmel, like mine's Jerry Lewis, okay? It's like my conscience is just making funny faces and funny voices. But, Jimmy Kimmel has really sunk. He's really become kind of weaselly at this point. He has that thing that the left has where they think the First Amendment not only protects their freedom of speech, which it does. I don't want Jimmy Kimmel to have to shut up or anything like that. But they think it also protects them from criticism and the consequences of the things they say. So people are picking on him, and Kimmel's response is to accuse all of us who disagree with him of essentially being accessories before the fact. Here's Kimmel with his usual emotionalism. They say Kimmel is getting his talking points from Chuck Schumer. I guess they're right. It sounds just like him. All right, but here's what Kimmel really said.
I'm not going to get deep into it again tonight. I said what I had to say last night, but I do want to say something to these nuts who spent most of the day today on television and online attacking those of us who think we need to do something about the fact that 59 innocent people were killed. They say it's inappropriate to be talking about it because it's too soon. Well, maybe it's too soon for you, because deep down inside, in your heart, you bear some responsibility for the fact that almost anyone can get any weapon they want. Now you want to cover yourself until the storm of outrage passes. You can go back to your dirty business as usual, but it's not too soon for us because we're Americans, and last time I checked, the First Amendment is at least as important as the Second Amendment.
Oh, yeah. Well, so we're going back to our dirty business here. Go back to our dirty business defending the Second Amendment and disagreeing with Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, that's what he's complaining about. Nobody said, shut Jimmy Kimmel down. Nobody said, he can't have his stupid show where he abuses the publicly owned airways. Instead of delivering the comedy that he's being paid for, he delivers this kind of garbage where he now has just told all the people in this country who believe in the Second Amendment that they are, complicit in the slaughter in Vegas. Just to have one more voice in there, Steve Scalise again the congressman who was shot and nearly killed by the Bernie Bro shooter at the softball game in D.C., he says this has fortified his pro-Second Amendment opinions.
First of all, you've got to recognize that, when there's a tragedy like this, the first thing we should be thinking about is praying for the people who were injured and doing whatever we can to help them, to help law enforcement. We shouldn't first be thinking of promoting our political agenda. And I think we see too much of that where people say, oh, okay, now you have to have gun control. Well, first of all, look at some of those bills. Those bills wouldn't have done anything to stop this. I mean, the gunmen actually cleared background checks. Yeah. So to promote some kind of gun control, I think, is the wrong way to approach this. And frankly, what I experienced was when there was a shooter, luckily we had Capitol Police there with their own guns. Every single day in America, regular citizens that just have a passionate belief in the Second Amendment, that have their own guns, use guns every single day to protect themselves against criminals. And those stories never get told or hardly ever get told. But that's a different side of the story that I think is important, that people use guns way more to defend themselves from criminals than criminals using guns to hurt people.
To bring Scalise's point home, Kimmel says that he's gotten all this blowback from Trump supporters, so he's had to increase security. Now, I think we all know that those security guys are carrying guns, right? I used to live, I really do live in Hollywood, and my next door neighbor used to be one of the biggest stars out here. And I won't expose who he was because I think just because you happen to live next to me doesn't give me the right. Your home should be like a castle. I don't want to dox the guy, it's like just, so it doesn't matter who it was, but it was a very liberal, big star, very nice in all our dealings, with him, but a very avid anti-gun campaigner. Every single day, men with guns came into that house to protect that house and to protect that person who was a major, major celebrity. The gunman even called up my wife and told her that they would be watching our house as well, because their house is obviously, because much bigger star, they had this huge mansion kind of looking down on us. But they said, if there's any trouble there, we'll be happy to come over. I thought that was great. I thought that was really good. But, the point is, I can't afford to have bodyguards. I get threatened. I get people who wish I was dead and all that stuff. And ordinary people, obviously, the people in Vegas, they're not movie stars. We can't all afford the security that Jimmy Kimmel has. We carry guns for protection. We hold guns for protection. This is the same thing, and maybe it's just that we like guns. Maybe some people just have guns because they like them, but most people are trying to be safer. So there's a lot of hypocrisy and all that crying and all that blaming people and all that cursing people out and calling them nuts and saying that they are part of this dirty business and somehow complicit in this massacre. It's a weasel thing to do. It is a really nasty, low, despicable thing to do. So let me read you what I just thought was an unbelievably great piece from Charlie Cook. Charlie Cook is what I like about Charlie Cook is he's British born. I don't know if he's become an American citizen, but he knows more. I've been on cruises with him and panels with him, and he just knows a lot about the First Amendment and all this stuff. But he wrote a piece yesterday called "The Right to Bear Arms Isn't Up for Debate." Okay, and let me just read. I want to read as much of this piece as I can, and I'll interrupt myself to talk about some other things. But he begins by saying, when debating the wisdom of the Constitution's Second Amendment, the media tends to start from the presumption that the question is purely scientific and that the answers can and should be derived from statistical analyses and relentless experimentation. And let me stop right there, because there was another article out yesterday from a statistician who said, after researching gun violence, I no longer believe in gun control. This is a woman named Leah Labresco, who is a liberal, formerly of Nate Silver's 538 site, where they gather all the information, a lot of the electoral statistics. She crunched the numbers in a study of all 33,000 gun homicides in the United States annually. She went in thinking that the usual liberal menu of anti-gun policies would reduce that number dramatically. She came out concluding that the only selling point of anti-gun policies is that gun owners hate them. You know how we on the right with Trump are being accused of only doing things to make liberals cry? She says this is the only reason to do this. And here's what she said. I researched the strictly tightened gun laws in Britain and Australia and concluded that they didn't prove much about what America's policy should be. Neither nation experienced drops in mass shootings or other gun-related crime that could be attributed to their buybacks and bans. Mass shootings were too rare in Australia for their absence after the buyback program to be clear evidence of progress. And in both Australia and Britain, the gun restrictions had an ambiguous effect on other gun-related crimes or deaths. When I looked at the other off-praise policies, I found that no gun owner walks into the store to buy an assault weapon. Finally, someone on the left figures this out. It's an invented classification that includes any semi-automatic that has 2 or more features, such as a bayonet mount, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher mount, a folding stock, or a pistol grip. But guns are modular, and any hobbyist can easily add these features at home, just as if they were snapping together Legos. That's one of the things that this guy did. He had, what are they called, bump stocks. And you don't even need a bump stock to turn a semi-automatic into an automatic. It's really a question of handling the recoil. So she goes on to say, as my coworkers and I kept looking at the data, it seemed less and less clear that one broad gun control restriction could make a big difference. 2/3 of gun deaths in the United States every year are suicides. This is what happens when a liberal looks at facts. Suddenly they become us. What is a conservative? A conservative is a liberal who looks at facts. All right, let me get back to this Charlie Cook piece because I think it's just excellent. This is the Second Amendment is not up for debate. He says the statistical approach is mistaken. The right of the people to keep and bear arms is not the product of the latest research fads or exquisitely tortured data journalism, but a natural extension of the Lockean principles on which this country was founded. It must be protected as such. The Declaration of Independence presumes that all men enjoy certain inalienable rights, and among them are life and liberty. Practically speaking, at both the state level as a bulwark against tyranny and at the individual level as a means by which to protect oneself, this necessitates the auxiliary right to the private ownership of arms, which in the common law that preceded the Second Amendment was understood to include personal weapons. In other words, because of the theories and the ideas that were built up over centuries that ended with the Lockean point of view about natural law, we have a right, a God-given right. Remember, these rights were endowed by our Creator to life and liberty, and part of those rights, to defend your liberty and to defend your life, you need to be able to be armed, okay? And I'm going to pause here again. Here is a brief clip of Chuck Todd saying what everybody on the left is saying is we need to act now because we're emotional and now is the time to act on our emotions. So here's Chuck Todd saying this, and I'll tell you why I play it in just a sec.
This is exactly the time to start talking about any issue, gun violence included. If we wait until cooler heads prevail on any of these, we never talk about it. And in fact, if we applied the same logic to every other debate and every other crisis that this country faces that we do to the gun debate, we never would have focused on any of those issues either.
We can't wait till cooler heads prevail. If cooler heads prevail, we'll look at facts and numbers. Now, the reason I wanted to play this is because I also wanted to play something I've been meaning to play since last week. Remember the guy in Alabama, Roy Moore, who is a very religious, very openly religious guy, is always talking about God when he gives speeches, quoting the Bible when he gives speeches. He talked about how our rights come from God, and that is what it says in the Declaration of Independence. We are endowed by our Creator. Our Creator, this is going to surprise you, but our Creator is actually not Barack Obama. Our Creator is God. He endowed us with these rights. He made us. They are self-evident rights, among them life and liberty. Here is Chuck Todd reacting, the same Chuck Todd who just told you not to wait till cooler heads prevail, reacting to Roy Moore's winning the primary in Alabama.
Roy Moore, where the phrase Christian conservative doesn't even begin to describe him, could very well be your next U.S. Senator. And if you don't understand just how freaked out some folks in the GOP and the White House are about what that means, then you don't know Roy Moore. First off, he doesn't appear to believe in the Constitution as it's written.
Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from a Bill of Rights. They come from Almighty God.
Now, that's just a taste of what are very fundamentalist views that have gotten him removed from office twice as Alabama's Chief Justice.
I'm sorry, I'm speechless. I was like, I haven't listened to that cut for a week, but when I first played it, I was speechless. And there is Chuck Todd, who thinks that when, like Jimmy Kimmel, he thinks that if his face is facing a camera, he must know something, or why would they be pointing a camera at him? And Roy Moore says what is foundational, it is foundational, it is the bottom block in the Jenga tower of America that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And the argument that Charles Cook is making is that that endowment necessitates that we have guns, necessitates that we can protect ourselves. And there is Chuck Todd when he hears somebody say what is in our founding documents, that's unconstitutional. He doesn't believe in the Constitution. Chuck Todd thinks our rights emanate from the Constitution. Our Constitution is there to protect, including the Second Amendment, is there to protect our God-given rights. All right, let's get back to Charlie Cook's piece. This is the Second Amendment is not up for debate, even if Jimmy Kimmel himself, the conscience of America, says it is. Cook writes, at the time of the American founding, it was widely understood that there was a real danger in a government's attempting to deprive the people of what Alexander Hamilton called their original right of self-defense. This is why, when it came to writing the Constitution, the anti-federalists who feared the government's potential to become corrupt refused to sign on to a more powerful national government until they had been promised certain explicit protections. You remember, right, they had a first Constitution that wasn't strong enough, didn't have a strong enough central government, so they went back to the Constitutional Congress, and that's when they started writing the federal papers to argue we needed a stronger central government. But a lot of people were saying if we have a stronger central government, they're going to take over everything. Why would they say something like that? What on earth made them think that? Okay, but then as now, says Cook, their logic was clear. It makes no sense to allow the representatives of a free people to disarm their masters. This is what they've forgotten. We are their masters. It makes no sense to allow the people who merely represent us to disarm us, their masters. This is why this piece is so good. I mean, maybe it took an Englishman to figure this out. Reacting to this argument, we often hear advocates of gun control propose that the founders' observations are irrelevant because they could not have imagined the modern world. Isn't that the one they always say? Well, they didn't see automatic weapons, as if the government doesn't have automatic weapons too. The weapons have gone up on both sides. Cook says, I agree with the latter assertion. The founders could not have imagined the modern world. As well-read in world history as they were, there is no way that they could have foreseen just how prescient they were in insisting on harsh limitations of government power, just how far-seeing they were. In their time, tyranny was comparatively soft. Their complaints focused on underrepresentation and the capricious restriction of ancient rights. In the past century, by contrast, tyranny involved the systematic execution of entire groups of people and the enslavement of whole countries. The notion that if James Madison had foreseen the 20th century, he would have concluded that the Bill of Rights was too generous is laughable. Conservatives who are scared of tyrants often ask, could it happen here? Well, it did happen here. Jim Crow, the Ku Klux Klan, lynching, legal segregation. For a period, the South was everything a free man should fear. When Ida B. Wells was a black journalist and suffragette, I guess you'd call it. She was like an early feminist, and she was like a newspaper writer, early part of the 20th century, late part of the 19th century. When Ida B. Wells noted that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every black home, and it should be used for that protection which the law refuses to give, she was confirming an age-old truth. The gun is a great equalizer, and the state is a capricious beast. It is from this understanding that all conversations must proceed. The Second Amendment is not old, it is timeless. It is not unclear, it is obvious. It is not embarrassing, it is fundamental. And as much as anything else, it is a vital indicator of the correct relationship between the citizen and the state, and a reminder of the unbreakable sovereignty of the individual. Unless those calling for greater restrictions learn to acknowledge this at the outset of any public discussion, they will continue to get nowhere in their deliberations. That is a brilliant piece, and the reason that is a brilliant piece is because it shifts the conversation back to where it should should be an understanding that we want to be armed to protect us against the state. Listen, I love the cops. The cops do a great job. The cops have been shaped, as we all have been shaped, by this wonderful, liberal, free society that they live in. They respect people's rights. They really do. I mean, if you ever see cops on the beat, they really do. They play by the rules. When the new rules come down, they may not like them, but they usually play by them. Sometimes they skirt the rules if they have to, but they usually play by the rules. You don't see what you see in Catalonia. In Catalonia, they're trying to have this vote. They had this vote to become a separate state, right, to break away from Spain. And the Spanish said, well, that's illegal because our Constitution says the whole country has to vote on this. Well, that's a rigged system, right? I mean, I'm not saying Catalonia should break away. I'm not making any comment on the right of their cause, but certainly you can't have a vote to break away in which four-fifths of the country gets a vote to keep you there. That's not fair, right? That's not fair. If you want independence, there should be some way that you can address that case. So they sent in the cops, and the cops were beating people up when they tried to vote. And now they're moving toward what looks like it could become like an armed conflict. It could become a civil war. I hope not, but that's the kind of thing it's moving toward. When you look at that, how can you think that the people shouldn't have guns when the cops can come in, soldiers come in and take you out of the voting booth by force? How can you think that the people shouldn't be able to fight back? And people say, well, the American military is so tough that we could never beat them. You know, they haven't done so well in Afghanistan. It's not that easy to fight a local populace in arms. God forbid that should ever happen, but God forbid twice that it should happen and the people not be armed, okay? Listen, when Charlie says this is timeless, go back to the Bible. You know, when the Hebrews first came into the land of Israel, they had no government. They just had prophets who would tell them what God was saying through the prophets. When things got bad and they were oppressed by the Philistines, or as we call them now, the Palestinians, when things got bad and they were oppressed by, surrounding armies, they would have a guy they would call one of the judges who would rise up, sometimes a girl who would rise up and help them fight back against the surrounding people. Then they'd go back to their places and govern themselves through the word of God. You know, when the prophet Samuel got old, he appointed his sons, and his sons were corrupt. And so the people came to him and said, why can't we have kings like everybody else? And Samuel thought, well, that's not a good idea. You don't want to do that. And he went to God, and God said to Samuel, he said, don't worry. He said, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So Samuel went back to the people and said, okay, you want to have kings? These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s and some to plow his ground and reap his harvest and make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariot. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and put them to work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. Government has always been a problem. We have the right to liberty. We have the God-given right to liberty. We have the God-given right to life. You cannot protect liberty or life unless you're armed. That's it. That's the answer. And I don't give a rat's what Jimmy Kimmel thinks, because the guy is a weasel and he's a fool. And I don't care how he cries. I don't care what he says. That's why we have the right to bear arms.